Imagine a man from a tiny town in Nova Scotia, who could look at a pile of rusty, forgotten metal and see something nobody else could. Where most people saw scrap, Chad Hiltz saw possibilities. He saw wild shapes, impossible designs, and cars that existed nowhere except inside his imagination. From a small garage, with limited resources and no guarantee of success, Chad began building a reputation around one simple idea. If you couldn't afford to buy the dream, you could build it yourself. And eventually, that unusual approach caught the attention of millions. That was the beginning of Bad Chad Customs. What started as a small workshop slowly became a television phenomenon, bringing Chad, Jolene, Colton, and their small team into homes around the world. Viewers weren't watching another polished car restoration show. They were watching something far more unpredictable. Old Chrysler bodies, scrap frames, strange pieces of metal, and forgotten parts were being transformed into outrageous custom creations. Every build felt like a gamble, because Chad wasn't simply restoring cars to factory condition. He was creating something completely different. Then came Discovery Channel, and suddenly the little shop was operating under a completely different kind of pressure. Television brought attention, opportunities, and a much larger audience, but it also brought deadlines. Builds that might normally take months had to be completed within a much tighter schedule. There were filming requirements, production expectations, customer commitments, and the constant pressure to deliver something spectacular on camera. Creativity doesn't always follow a calendar, and Chad's imagination certainly wasn't designed for an assembly line. The same chaos that made the show exciting also created an enormous amount of pressure behind the scenes. Then the world itself changed. In 2020, the pandemic disrupted almost everything. Supply chains were affected, businesses faced restrictions, staffing became more complicated, and filming under normal conditions became increasingly difficult. For a small custom shop already trying to balance television production with real-world business, the timing could hardly have been worse. And just as the pressure was increasing, another problem appeared around the identity of one of Chad's most recognizable creations, the Green Goblin. The name became connected to legal and branding issues, forcing the business to rethink how that identity could be used publicly. Suddenly, the people behind the shop weren't just worrying about building cars. They were dealing with branding, merchandise, online platforms, marketing, and the complicated reality of protecting a business identity. A rebrand might look simple from the outside, but for a small company, changing signs, products, websites, social media, and promotional material can create another layer of stress. Yet Chad kept moving forward, because the name was never the most important part of what he was doing. The creativity was. Eventually, Bad Chad Customs disappeared from television. The second season ended, and there was no dramatic farewell that gave fans a satisfying explanation. The cameras simply stopped. For viewers who had become invested in the show, that silence created questions. What happened to Chad? Was the shop still operating? Would the builds continue? And perhaps most importantly, would audiences ever see that world again? The end of television didn't mean the end of the pressure. If anything, the attention surrounding Chad created a new challenge. Once millions of people know your name, everyone has an opinion. Some viewers admired his originality, while others criticized his building methods. Some questioned the shortcuts they believed they saw in his work. Others accused the show of exaggerating drama, or presenting an unrealistic version of what happened inside the shop. Chad had spent years building cars his own way, so criticism wasn't necessarily new to him. But being judged by thousands of strangers who only knew what they saw through edited television footage was a completely different experience. Over time, the criticism became more personal. It wasn't only about cars anymore. People began discussing Chad's personality, his management style, his crew, and the way he ran the workshop. For someone already dealing with long hours, deadlines, business responsibilities, and the pressure of maintaining a public image, that constant outside noise could become exhausting. Yet Chad continued doing what he had always done. Some viewers admired his originality, while others criticized his building methods. Some questioned the shortcuts they believed they saw in his work. Others accused the show of exaggerating drama, or presenting an unrealistic version of what happened inside the shop. Chad had spent years building cars his own way, so criticism wasn't necessarily new to him, but being judged by thousands of strangers who only knew what they saw through edited television footage was a completely different experience. Over time, the criticism became more personal. It wasn't only about cars anymore. People began discussing Chad's personality, his management style, his crew, and the way he ran the workshop. For someone already dealing with long hours, deadlines, business responsibilities, and the pressure of maintaining a public image, that constant outside noise could become exhausting. Yet Chad continued doing what he had always done. But real life rarely follows the dramatic explanations people create online. Sometimes people simply need time to step away from the noise and deal with what matters most. Chad returned to YouTube, and the difference was noticeable. There was no television network deciding what the audience should see. No rigid television format forcing every project into a specific storyline. Instead, the shop became the story again. Builds, repairs, experiments, mistakes, ideas, and everyday workshop life could unfold on Chad's own terms. YouTube gave Bad Chad something television never completely could: control. Chad could decide what to build, when to film it, how much of the process to show, and how directly to communicate with the people who had followed him for years. The content became less about fitting into a television formula, and more about returning to the reason people had discovered him in the first place: the cars and the creativity. Sometimes it's measured by what you build when nobody is watching, who you bring along with you, and what remains after the cameras finally stop rolling. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more documentaries about the people and stories behind the automotive world, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many more stories still waiting to be uncovered.